Hello everyone, today we talk about solar symbolism in traditional regality. I introduced this series on the ancient meaning of monarchy to highlight better the contrast between deity and humanity, to explain more concretely different references that I made in some videos about especially the Middle Ages, but also in fact traditional empire, right, in until the contemporary era, as a matter of fact, to the very root, right, of this issue that can be understood doctrinally only through the history proper of it, the various references in the sacred texts, and as a consequence also, making a bit of exercise as far as historical skepticism in itself is concerned, right? Because it may be obvious that for a channel like mine that I've never conceived specifically for example, sourcing every single thing I say, which at least in this videos I will do. There are, of course, several sources and other references that we will make specifically, but regarding the sort of idea that if you don't, again, source every single damn thing every step of the way, what you're talking about is maybe, right, or has to be in that sense less qualitative than what others say, and that there is and so this notion that there would be a sort of fully, sort, not absolutely, but still formally recognizable true history that cannot leave room for anything else, and any other theory and interpretation is fundamentally just a sort of scheme for people that are ideological enough to produce some kind of forgery, etc. It's a very relevant issue, and I would give you that, of course, YouTube is not the best medium. I make videos on this platform for many practical reasons, in parallel to my, say, professional historical activity. But I always like to challenge anyone, really, to be honest about what they think they actually know or they don't about a topic like this, for example, of course, that gets down to the point of life, of politics, of basically the universe in the way it was seen, and that, however, still talks today to the deepest chords of our morality, I would say. This is important in the case of kingship, traditionally, because as a Clausewitzian, I, of course, know that war is really an instrument of politics with other means. And so you can never teach military history without referencing to the political mandate, right? So not just the strategical, but originally the political objective of any action, right? And making history, let's say, without asking yourself about the ultimate point of it all, it's like being bogged into a swamp and just getting, interested in all the various, scum you can find there, and making all your life in function of this, in fact, irrelevant issues without having a clear hierarchy of values, first of all, but also of method and of how, and so, in order to understand what actually matters. Right, so just note that I have only begun. I will make hundreds of videos, of course, about traditional religion, and the figure of kings is recurrent. Right, I'm more about the empire in a modern institutional language, for at least those that, again, interpret history mostly in the what somebody would call mainstream way. Towards which I'm also very sympathetic, because I have to express myself in ways that must be understood, at least if I want this to go further. Actually, we explained in the previous video about traditional regality what is the deal between, in fact, realm and empire, right? Kings and emperors. And this is also like a difference that every person in a more conventional way should of course distinguish by vocabulary without my explanation. So I'm not trying to conflate the two things, right? But the concept of the leader in itself here, his persona, and the different natures of this being, and as a consequence, also the different awareness, right, and dimension in which he moves is a bit at the root of the entire tradition of politics. The transcending capacity, mainly, but also the one of, let's say, the connection between, for example, the Father and the Son, right? Anybody who thinks that, I don't know, there was no such thing like the Trinity before Christianity, because allegedly, I meet sometimes some certain curious characters outside of here. I would actually compliment my audience for being very tidy and polite and accepting all my digressions and rants, right? But that always do get to a point. But ideologically speaking, and that's why I also tell these things, because you have to spend the stuff in real life, right? You will always meet with a very specific type of ideology that I think I've described here and there, and I'm not sure I've ever made a video specifically about that. I surely refer to it quite explicitly many times, even in videos that were somehow dedicated to it, but that we will have to analyze a bit more deeply under the light of this certain proper traditional awareness, right? They want to make you believe that, I don't know, before Christianity, there was no such thing like salvific purpose of the sacrifice of the same God and ruler, that there was no such thing like, the Holy Trinity, or that there wasn't this Catholic universal meaning of the empire, right? So that Christianity then, and all these other religions that we tend to separate as such, like, will make much more sense in a unique flow that we will also see when talking specifically about Christianity. In any case, as it's also widely known, kingship was often associated with the solar symbol. It is true that there were other, think about Jupiter and the sense that, different planets could be associated to this sort of force, but there is a generic character to that, right? The idea of the greatest celestial object becoming essentially the metaphor for the ultimate divinity, and so the one that actually ruled the universe entirely, is something as obvious as, however, metaphysically intended, right? Sometimes people say, well, how bad it was that, in those last moments of paganism, Christian bishops were still complaining in their letters that people, before entering church, they still bowed to the actual sun outside, while now they were forced to just reflect on, and that's where they stop, because they don't understand what the entire point, in fact, of the saying Christianity. Also, as far as the regal meaning of Christ, that of course was what had always been there, right? And now just had gradually been lost, not because of Christianity, but because of what humanity was undergoing from centuries of decadence, right? So that is often misunderstood. It's one of the things we want to see, in fact, a bit more in perspective. Now, in the king, in all his majesty, and we talk the latter aspect also as far as, for example, the Holy Roman Imperial Institution was concerned in my medieval history series, people saw the same glory and victory proper, which of course was symbolized by the victory of the sun, right, and the light, which every morning overcomes darkness, right? Of course, through the Saturnalia, through the origins of Christmas, that we celebrate essentially the victory of light, of life, right, over the darkness, at the end of this natural astronomic cycle, which truly makes us more aware of, or should make us more aware of, the traditional meaning, that of course has all to do with the actually eschatological meaning. It's wrong to presume that the ancients, the pagans, or whatever you call them, had a cyclical view of the actual metaphysical reality. Let's say there were cycles within it, and there is no doubt, and these were all these let's say natural phenomena were meant to reinforce that, but to a specific teleology and a eschatology that had to do with the, of course, decadence of mankind through, in fact, the fading of the awareness of the sacred in the heart of man, and so the ultimate struggle, right, against the forces of the darkness as well, that were, however, meant to bring to a final victory. At least the idea that, as we've seen in the video about the way of the left hand, that you could not really attain divinity without having challenged and evoked properly the darkest forces of evil, was in fact anti-traditional in of itself. So the idea is that darkness would creep in, right? It's the idea of, in fact, the rotten roots of the tree of the world, the sense, in fact, of the actual enemy of mankind being the chthonic serpents, that with a good piece of the Gnostics, in fact, is an actual symbol of evil in all these religions. And yes, it must be killed because of the wisdom that it offers, but it's not actually, an anti-god or a good god in disguise, while we live under superstition. That, if anything, is on us personally, right? Not on the actual principle that you have to reattain as mankind, right? And so thinking that there is a parallel God, right? And so a dualistic heresy for which you can excuse yourself for being a miserable individual in a metaphysical sense, and having a mission, in fact, to fix that, is not really what any of these cultures actually believed. And this is not to say that, of course, there weren't those who had belonged to the worlds of the earth, to the cyclical vision, etc. But these are exactly the ones who were crushed by the stocks of conquerors that instead brought pretty universally, together with civilization, the actual redemption of the same. Of course, there was a material development that, however, had emerged thanks to a spiritual one, that would decline, and so the vestiges of this power were, as you know, gradually reinvigorated, right, with the actual sacrifice, the actual blood spilled by the conquerors, that were, however, to transcend further, to try to reach God again through exactly this redeemed humanity. And this was the actual symbol of mechanism behind all these beliefs, and it's frankly astonishing. I'm a military historian, but I actually have one of my titles actually includes history of religion. And albeit I know relatively few about it for my standards, it's dramatically painful for me to see not just how much of this sort of complete misinterpretation of the info actually is out there, but finding out precisely the reasons why that is the case, which is, in fact, all what was called as weakness by the same traditions, and the incredible, at the end of the day, it's, again, mostly, I don't want to digress on the issue of neo-paganism, whatever, but you think these people would have any kind of insight on this stuff. They don't actually have any competence, right? They start from completely wrong premises and basically just get into that, and they don't even arrive to space enough to see what the alternative, or actually the actual deal is, as an horizon, and become phobic or aggressive, or like they just, you understand there is something about it's not just about neo-pagans as such. I'm sure there are people out there who try to pursue sort of historical criteria, but it's not even about paganism itself. This happens also with other beliefs. How much this is just insisted as a sort of defense, right, of completely inverse meaning compared to tradition regarding what religion should be for you as a being, and not wanting to acknowledge the actual mission, the actual purpose, right? The Evangelion that lays behind this whole stuff, right? In any case, the sun and the light, the symbols of the superior nature, right? So also the natural phenomenon in itself acquires, let's say, of course, always a universal, essential value, but it's not really referring to the entirety of the system. In other words, thinking that the sun just per se is nothing but a medium, right, that can allow you to access a much broader awareness of the universe, as insignificant as the sun literally is in front of infinity. The origin of the universe and everything that lays in it, well, in this sense, it is really a superstitious way to think that that was actually the source of the entire, at least the sense is the following, that you can't come back to be something greater than that, right? And so these meanings, the symbols, etc., are all, say, encoded in a much broader transcendental dimension than the one that the physical phenomenon per se really is, including the one pertaining to the celestial bodies that do contain forces, because the entire universe does, right? And so they do really affect human life in this sense, in tradition, but they're not the entirety of it all. And anything that basically puts you under something else that prevents you from properly transcending whatever this thing that is above you really does, is the ultimate failure, right, in the awareness of the understanding of divinity, which is not something that is merely above us. It is, of course, in the measure in which we are fallen, but its meaning is something that transcends our same concept of above. It is a much greater magnification that is incommensurable for at least as long as we are in our human status. In any case, again, the symbolism of, especially of the sun, of the light in general, surrounded by the darkness, but managing to defeat these, is the ultimate sense of achievement, right? Of grandiose, epic, metaphysical reversal, right, of the trend of decline, and so the fulfillment of the divine mission. And this is how the entire symbolism goes in the various cultures we will see now. We'll talk about Egypt. We'll look at some Indo-European stuff, and then we'll come back to Egypt, because this cycle will help us observing a lot about the universal meaning of regality, even in cultures that we're, say, at least in the West, much more familiar with, but that we, in fact, have forgotten the traditional meaning of. So the symbol, a true symbol of regality, right? Because his father, Osiris, was the true son of the cosmic and, in fact, telluric principle, and as you know, he gets killed by Seti. This is the most famous Egyptian myth, and Horus is to avenge his father, and so his regality that must be regained and recollected, reachieved, as the king had been killed. And so metaphysically speaking, this had enormous implications, because it showed how the forces of the darkness could prevail, and how, however, light had be restored. In fact, in the myth, again, Horus rises every day on his throne as king of the living, just like his father Ra, the sun. I just said that Osiris is Horus' father, but the sense that Ra embodying of course, the sun, which is also what it literally and etymologically means, is the absolute principle, right, of divinity that has to be attained by he who lords over the universe, makes, of course, Horus is still the son of the absolute principle as well, especially in his achievement and accomplishment. Of course, Horus rises to the throne himself, but the sun does, right, in this cycle, yes, but one in which Horus had to rise to at some point, and now is establishing himself. But obviously, the time of the myth is the establishment of this action in itself, right? So not much the permanency of Horus on the throne, even though this was symbolized by the pharaoh's continuity. That symbolized both Ra and Horus. Now, there is a very interesting etymology to the name of Horus, which we will come back on later, at least when we will observe the connections with the same. It is to say, to be far away. This is what Horus says about himself, defining, I am Horus, distant of place from people and gods. Right? He is far from the gods. His ways are hidden from those who dwell upon earth. This is another saying. Meaning exactly what? Right? Didn't we say, just like in the Trinity, that after all, God, Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost descending on the ladder as a ruler on earth are one? This is the dogma properly also in Christianity. Yes, because this, of course, tells us about the unitary achievement, right, of divinity by he who manages to reach that absolute power. And this is actually what pertains in the Egyptian let's say, mythology, religion, more properly to Ra as the absolute principle, is again what we call God, etc. in the different languages. But as I just said, what is established by the myth is the mechanism by which this happens. Why is Horus distant as much as from the people, if from God, if he is actually ruling as king of the living by essentially divine blessing, as we'll see later, thanks to his achievements of slaying the forces of the darkness as the rising sun? Well, because this is exactly the point. The myth describes the function, right? We should talk about the doctrine of the two natures, that is, the one of being and becoming. I will make another video about this, but this is essentially the point. Horus is in a phase of becoming. He's not quite God as the absolute principle, but he's not a human anymore either. In other words, he is, in fact, in another dimension that is separated from both the divine and the earthly one, albeit being experienceable across, because of course there is a connection throughout these dimensions that is hierarchical, hermetic, etc., but that reveals Horus fighting, right? And as we will see later, not just God the Horus the fighter, but also Horus the walker. And you have no idea, as we will see now, how much there is about this, about the same etymology of certain terms in the Veda regarding the sun, the Roman triumph, and what this say solar attributions were really about. We will come back on it. There is another saying that says, I have decreed that you must eternally rise as king of the north and of the south, on the seat of Horus like the sun. These were dicta referred to pharaohs, right? So they belong to the ancient Egyptian royal tradition. That it doesn't leave any doubt, right? there is here the complexion of the north and the south. There is, as we will see, also in Egyptian tradition, a very specific reference to the east and west axis regarding even the actual origins of the stocks of pharaohs, right? And so this essentially a race of gods that had come to rule in Egypt in the first place. In any case, the connection with Horus is obvious. Now, these dicta are strikingly similar in their content to the sayings of the Iranian tradition, in which the king, we're talking about Persia here, of course, belonging to a much broader area. And again, these were values universally shared, as you understand here, across different cultures, which the king is believed to be, in fact, of the same stock as the gods. This is the obvious principle. Again, those who rule are essentially blessed by having decayed less as humans from the divine statuses. So it was believed that those who had already achieved as great rulers, the teaching of which the living example which had to be imitated in this also supernatural dimension we seen in the previous video, were in fact the relatives of the ancestors of. Also here with the different degrees of achievement that were to be incarnated by the same earthly rulers. That could be so, as we've seen many times, only in virtue of their actual spiritual achievement, and so the one that would make them closer to God, right? Not just ideally, but literally through some capacities that would manifest in the same physical realm, right? So it was considered to be possible that all the force, all the energy that the ruler would emanate, literally, from a spiritual point of view, would transform. It would literally incarnate on Earth and was represented by essentially all the forces he controlled, right? And the idea is that the world conquest was the ultimate goal of this, because, of course, the regal prerogative stemmed also from the fact that humanity would have been transfigured by such rule and effectively elevated in a unitary direction towards the one, reachieving the cosmical unit that had been broken from the fall, right, with the incarnation of the celestial vaults. The actual creation here, of course, if I say creation, you think mostly about the standard fact that we're habituated to so properly an ordained world created specifically for man, etc. But the concept goes fundamentally beyond this point, right? It's mixed in. It's actually the same meaning. Even if you read the Bible, of course, you understand it's the product of a historical tradition, and certain meanings are conflated, but the same. Even inconsistencies that exist in the story are actually containing the original meaning of the word, right? So it is just something we should look at in other context, but this is not disqualifying at all the Old Testament specifically. And we will come back on Genesis, because it's really one of the most crucial book in the Bible that must really be interpreted with the adequate instruments, otherwise it becomes quite tricky in many ways. But of course, everybody has their opinion on this, because really no human being ever existed with the same belief, right? And this is also what God traditionally leaves to us, because it's really where the divine potential ready to be reawakened to make this product of the fall coming back, in fact, to the one itself, right? And here you understand also the depths of, say, the biblical implication between the relation between God and man, in that sense of even of challenging in a way, but in the aforementioned sort of middle heaven, we can say, or earth, or ground, that we were looking at in the case of Horus, right, referring to himself as distant of place from people and gods, right, and so something that has to happen in between, right, without which that divinity cannot quite be fully attained. You know that also in Christian tradition, etc., there is an eschatological perspective of war, right? Things are not going to be so smooth, right? If faith can make this prevail, and this is also actually an important element that was preserved, especially in Catholic tradition, that dates back to the very origins, in times of which not everybody had actually lost concretely the hope that, say, works could succeed, right, in winning in the final storming of the Asgard, right, and in fact the arrival of the Age of the Wolf. But here that's, the gates of hell shall not prevail against her, meaning the church. But we'll see this better in another point, and just the dictum is quite famous. In any case, in the Persian tradition, the king has the same throne of Mithras, and he rises with the sun, right? Incredibly similar to what we've seen about the pharaoh regarding with Horus and Ra, right? It's basically the same thing, right? The same function. Mithras, as you know, is perhaps the best embodiment of that sense, that literally being born out of a stone, right? So something that would seem to us the most deprived of life object that can exist, and that could become the sun himself, right? By the struggle in between. You understand the similarity. Also in the Roman tradition, the ruler is called particeps siderum, which stands for literally partaking of the stars, right? And this was the original heroic understanding that, would mark the firmament in this hierarchy of powers, for which not everybody could quite achieve simply a, heaven or hell thing, but that there was a shot where it could reach closer to God or not, right, in the process, but still at a height in heaven that had to transcend this enormous force that we are actually, in a malevolent sense, the cause of, right, to keep ourselves still here. And so this great man had managed instead to transcend. We have other sayings such as Lord of Peace, salvation of mankind, eternal man, right? All adjectives that qualify rulers. Winner, who rises in company of the sun, right? In ancient Iran, the royal formula of consecration sounded like this: you art power, the force of victory, and immortal, made of gold. You rise at dawn together with Indra and with the sun. We see here also the connection with gold, the material that is less perishable, right? For humanity to identify in it, of course, a supernatural power, at least derivable from it, right? And so the most precious one, the one that in the Norse tradition had been used to build the Asgard itself, but had been polluted by the Nibelungs, that were this nether population that, of course, at different times means also humanity among in the various degrees of, say, of standard, which we would consider it, so that there could be heroes in that, think about the Nibelungen, etc. But it was still this sort of race that was inferior to the Aesir, right? And that in the process of course, this the gods essentially saying, well, I don't want to build it. Let's use the Nibelungs, had actually brought to this gold being cursed, right? And so the Asgard destined eschatologically to be stormed because of this primal impurity that the gold had, but that in that sense the soul had, because that's essentially what they were. We mentioned Indra here, that, as you know, was also a god in the Iranian religion broadly meant, but that, of course, pertained also to the Indo-Vedic tradition, the most ancient one, the one that basically we got at least through the later scriptures that were modified, etc. But some of the most originary, primitive, primal meaning of this of this ideas, which refer very interestingly to Roita. This Roita means the red one, right? It basically symbolizes the conquering force, which also personifies an aspect of the radiance of the divine fire, the one of Agni, right? Agni, and the same Latin ignis, the sacred fire guarded by the Vestal virgins, etc. The term Roita, the red one, is used as an epithet of the sun god in these earlier Vedas, right? He is mentioned as also an animal, right? Sometimes the red horse, which has notoriously both the Uranian and Telluric symbolism, or fish, the shore dweller. So the idea is always a being that, as Horus before, is actually in between two dimensions, but in one on their own, the one of the becoming, right? And this is, of course, say a force attributed to kingship in this tradition, because the saying goes, by coming forward, Agni had created kingship in this world. He had confirmed it as majesty and victory over his enemies, right? It stands for Roita, in fact. Now, the incredibly fascinating thing is that in the Latin aurum, right, roticization of the earlier ausum from Proto-Italic ausum and Proto-Indo-European hesuum, right, gold stands for to dawn, to become light, to become red in its etymological root, right? So let's aside Ignis and Agni, that of course are the same thing from India to Italy, but the meaning of gold is the same in these two cultures, associated to the red one, to the gold one, to dawn, to the rising one, and of course to royalty. Right, so just reading the etymology of them doesn't take much. We get, by the way, the aforementioned quote of the Vedic passage from the Atharva Veda, that is one of the four Vedas, right? It's considered, of course, the most important ancient texts of. It's essentially what has become Hinduism, but as you know, it stemmed from the Vedas. It's a collection of hymns, spells, incantations, etc., rituals for healing, protection, etc. And it's believed to date back to around 12,000 BC, right? So at the same time which, of course, the Vedas had established their power and these traditions were collected. And say, I don't know, at that time the Italics were just migrating from Central Europe in the Italian peninsula. And so just to say actually how, different times, different spaces, but still the same hardcore belief. In fact, in some ancient Roman representations that you can see on coins, and that in part I have uploaded here if I'm not wrong, or at least you can easily find them, the god Sol, so the sun, Sol Solis, presents the emperor with a sphere, which is notoriously the symbol of universal dominion, right? And these are coins mostly from the 3rd century, So in a time, as you know, in which the empire was going towards enotheism, think about Julian. We will discuss his work in a while, and you know that at that point, this sense that there was the sense of divinity was migrating from the necessity of a man to become God to actually believing in a static hypostasis for which just the sun, as I was saying before, was being worshipped, but the same rulers and people had abandoned this possibility of capacity of transcendence, is actually the same thing that normally anti-Christians blame on Christianity for having allegedly ruined the empire, but not realizing that we're actually believing the same things by that point, and that the broader problem is, as always, people, right? Average people, common people, the ones that are sinking the standards of humanity because they are simply forgetting what this whole thing is all about, and blame essentially somebody else for their own personal shortcomings. If you look at some denarii of the 2nd century BC, you can clearly see the various houses that of Rome that at that point were covering the magistracy for minting the coin, the Temple of Saturn, etc. In Rome, would of course try to celebrate their originally divine ancestry for the patres, the senators, by depicting at that point quadrigas with the sun, right, leading it with victory, opening the way naturally, and thus also being a brand, if not properly of the clan per se, but showing definitely that by the 2nd century BC, the solar symbolism that, of course, was always there in art, etc., but that we mostly attribute to the idea of the Sol Invictus. This sounds like more a late Roman thing, right? But was there primarily, and as I often point out, by the 2nd century BC, the Romans were already very primitive. Yes, in the 3rd century BC they had opened to the Hellenistic world, etc., but the core ideas of this people that had to transcend their own humanity to rule over the world, which was already a work in process, but still a work in process as well, was evenly expressed in that iconography, and unequivocally having to do with the sense, even that, of course, even though at that point there wasn't a king, but that still these various houses of heroes ideally could achieve the stuff. I talked extensively about the Pontifex Maximus in the previous video about the traditional regality, so that you can make yourself an idea of how that power was shared and wielded also in earlier Roman times. In any case, also from later times, we find this increased references to expressions such as the Sol Conservator, right? So the sun that conserves, the Sol Dominus Romani Imperi, that is the sun as the ruler of the Roman Empire, and obviously referring to the emperor, right? And so the idea, as we've seen with the other, with Horus, etc., that the ruler, in that sense, has achieved a divine status of some sort. This is fascinating because today we don't talk about Louis XIV, but there is, in reference to what I was saying before, in that sort of hypostaticization of this human and divine dimension with an ever less awareness of what existed in the middle ground, you also have the idea that, as in this case, that, of course, here the traditional awareness was present, the fact that the soul, in that sense, was the emperor, right? But the sense also that this that the state, right, and independently from the individual ruler, would be dominated by God as such, right? It's like, I don't know if you've ever read Kantorovic's The King's Two Bodies, right? That by the later Middle Ages there was the idea of la bannière ne meurt jamais, right? The idea that it was a human king that would die, but a spiritual one that would remain continuously, right? Also in between, the kings would succeed each other. And this speaking of a sort of course, a greater sense of the importance of state and institution, but in the process also the loss of the idea that it was about the individual that somehow was making that power the one it was, not just an abstract power that was simply living outside the individual. And the fascinating thing, especially about the here the English and the French mostly toyed with that because they were the most advanced monarchies at that point. There was the idea that when the king's actual dead body was essentially brought in the tomb, there was a last, the phrase in French means the flag never dies, right? So the idea that the banner of the kingdom is always up in the moment in which the king was brought in the tomb. The flag was lowered, saying "Le roi est mort," and then the banner raised again and "Vive le roi," right? So at that point, of course, there had been already designated a successor. Was never just a random thing. So that was to mimic the fact that still until the guy was literally in the tomb, it's as if he had been still alive. There were some beliefs regarding also the permanence of the soul in the nearby. We'll talk about this stuff because that's also traditional as far as the soul and what could be maintained also by the physical dimension, while this was essentially being separated by the spiritual one. But regarding to the Sun King, Louis XIV, for example, that was ruling on a hell of a state that was intended evermore exactly from France at that point as the complex of the entire institutions, the parliament, etc. And so not much just the ruler, the resumption of all the, in fact, Roi Soleil symbology connected to the sun. And if you look at all the Louis art is about this, God coming crashing the front as the rebellion of humanity that had been given by Prometheus the power of fire, of sacred fire, in fact, instead triumphing back on them with the thunder, the fire practically in his in the royal hand. So that's how much, even still by 17th, 18th century France, the establishment was actually aware about the originary traditional meaning of regality, right? But definitely the hypostaticization, and I use this term specifically to stress the fact this was starting to be separated, and not much that actual part of becoming that is the most difficult part, and it's not just about being a victorious general that manages to to put together parts of the empire in late antiquity, etc., to actually carry it out. The primarily spiritual meaning of this becoming and the action within that dimension. If you look at the same messiahs, the messianic meaning, if you think about in Shia Islam, like the idea of the imam that disappears because it transcends and he's suspensed into a world that nobody knows whether has to do with the divine one proper or still the earthly one. Who is this guy? Where is this guy? Well, it has to do exactly with this originary meanings, right? It's a bit like asking, where was Christ, right? Was Christ alive or dead on the cross, right? And to the during the days leading eventually to resurrection, right? That's it's not meant to be understood humanly, right? Even though it was not yet full divine attainment. And so this has enormous implications, as you understand. But this awareness, again, was pretty much alive throughout times. Julian's profession of faith was notoriously solar, right? He was speaking mostly from the standpoint of a dynastic consecration, speaking of his birth, his royal condition, and equating it to the brightness of the sun, right? In the hymn to King Helios, you really have all that information, right? It's a poetic piece, essentially, in which Julian praises the sun god, Helios, as the source of all life and sustenance on the earth. And all, the exaltation, in fact, of the radiant meanings of sun. There was a lot of Neoplatonism there, but the stuff was not invented by Neoplatonism. If anything, at that point, most of this was being echoed from much older times. It was the actual meaning of it. Sometimes I encounter people again that think, but this is just Neoplatonism because, I've been told that just Neoplatonism taught these things. Well, if you don't teach these meanings in the most ancestral religions, and if you don't understand they're talking all about the same thing, of course you will come up with the idea that it's just Neoplatonism as the later Hellenistic phenomenon. Because we have explicit pieces of literature written about the topic, right? But again, that's not how you actually make history, and that's why I'm here on YouTube, right? Not to quote every single source, but to give you the actual evidence of why we talk about this thing in the first place. Of course, by the time of Julian, again, the sense that the spiritual force of God radiated from higher worlds, and so this was seen already in a, way that was very idealistic and literary even. So probably Augustus would have had another idea of what a Roman imperial spirituality had to be compared to Julian, that would have been seen by him like a decadent Hellenist, as a matter of fact, and not as often anti-Christians do, as the last ballad of the truest Roman religion. It's how you do that, right? Nor Augustus would have probably been much liked in the first place by, Scipio Africanus or by Furius Camillus, etc. So things change, humans change, and the awareness of this, of the actual doctrine decreases, unfortunately. And that's why we're reviving it here. A reflection of the sun symbol was still alive, for example, in the heart of the Ghibelline Middle Ages. In fact, for Frederick II of Hohenstaufen, we have still the term Deitas Solis, that is to say, the deity of the sun, in reference to the Swabian ruler, which is fascinating because, as you know, there we are basically at the peak of the Holy Roman Empire, at least in that sense of feudal magnificence and, in fact, resumption of this old ancestral ideas before the crisis of universalism, and so also the degradation of, say, the same institutions, but the same fate of people in them. So such solar glory or victory that we observe in reference to kingship was not, as you understood, we explained just now, a mere symbol, right? It had to describe fundamentally a metaphysical reality and general dynamic, right, of how, again, the divinity, mankind, and rulers interacted. The ultimate result, as we've seen, was the sort of non-human operating force that acted from the outer side, right, which the king, in this sense, was not possessing by himself, and this was actually the anti-traditional meaning, right, that mostly, I would say, prevailed in our, again, modern contemporary times, but mostly among common people, lesser people, because otherwise, again, the doctrine, especially until the 19th century, was pretty self-evident from all the art. Think about neoclassicism and all what those beautiful royal residences across Europe really show you. Like, you visit them, but you don't even understand, because it's been completely removed as a meaning for you, because you come from the fourth estate and you still believe that, I don't know, you confuse imperial traditionalism with national socialism, right? And so you must not know, especially the actual meaning, because otherwise everything you have thought that your misery is to be celebrated for would of course collapse, because it's just a farce, and you actually know it deep inside. But saying it out loud would actually wake up people, and in spite of the initial sort of cognitive dissonance. One of the most characteristic symbolic expressions of the possession, again, of this power by the side of the monarch comes from the Zoroastrian tradition. There you have the famous concept of the Rabbena, that is to say, the divine glory, the splendor that the ruler possesses. And that, of course, comes in the form of Uranic entities connected to the sun, also the eagle, because there it's, again, I made a video about the traditional symbolism of the eagle. It has to do with the only bird that it was believed to literally look straight, to be able to look straight in the sun, because it was God chosen one, messenger. It's an apostolic meaning. And this glory descends on the ruler that, in this sense, enters in sin. So I discussed this in the video about traditional grace, right, with between Arjuna and Krishna. The concept, of course, that the glory comes to you and falls on you, like the Holy Ghost on the church and this Rabbena on the Persian rulers, is all one with the fact that you automatically deserve that. So, of course, it's a imaginific idea, the one of the bird actually descending, and its actual symbol, in fact, of the winged Iranian monarchy, right? But it has also the other meaning, of course, the fact that the ruler would raise himself towards heaven in the same process. And the saying goes that if the Persian ruler had said even one lie, this glory would fly away, right? So all these heavenly symbolisms, solar, importantly enough, alluded to the fact that monarchs literally partook of immortality, thus giving them witness through victory, which was actual victory, right? Of course, it was understood in a psychomaniac way, because it was, again, primarily a spiritual battle, right? The self-sacrifice in holy war, right? To slay your inner demons and managing to liberate yourself in heaven, thanks to the achievement of having essentially annihilated your own fallen condition. This could happen only through divine glory, because that took the form in the moment in which you achieved that attainment, simply because of the matching of your actions with the with cosmic harmony, and so the fact that you would, in a blaze, like, eventually ascend to heaven, even though this spiritual dimension was, as we've seen, the one that existed in between, right? So not in the sense that the ruler could not be seen by mortals visually, like ocularly, performing this struggle, because actually, think about in battle, etc. But the idea is that the struggle was inner, and so if humanity was not awoken to that same level of kingship, attained just by merit of that guy, it could be anyone if the merit was really there, even though, again, they thought that there was a sort of racial, say, descendancy, etc. The connected to that, but the idea was always that the spirit could transcend even the physical dimension. So whichever the sin of your ancestors, you could still transcend that. But in that sense, that awareness was not there, right? You don't actually, this is the true meaning of intelligence also in the Latin etymology. It's not much about the incapacity of seeing things, but the incapacity of understanding what things that you see actually mean, right? You can have everything under your eyes, but not really understanding that. So it's not just about appearances, and it's not just about, in fact, the earthly dimension as well, right? Consider that the Achaemenids were really ruling over the known world, and to them, these meanings were, and eventually also for the Alexandrian tradition and the Roman one, were all primarily stemming from, as we've seen also from the Vedas, from their broader Indo-European ancestry and beyond, as we've seen in Egypt, was essentially toying with the same ideas and were quite older in that. In any case, the military dimension is still very, very important, right? You must never, we will understand it coming back to the Egyptians in the end, because, of course, spirit is manifested in matter as well, right? So having such large empire, conquering so many peoples, crushing your foes in battle, etc., it's also this material display. It was not just alone the thing, but was a reflection of that divine grace. Were complementary, right? They're not mutually exclusive, but rather complementary, right? So, again, there is always a greater importance of the spirit over matter, but it's liminal. Again, we will look later about how pharaohs really saw this, but just to stick to the Ravena, in the Persian tradition, if you quote the Yasht 19, that is, the Yashts are a collection of hymns or songs in the Zoroastrian scriptures known as the Avesta, and they're dedicated to various deities, right? They're the most important texts in the Zoroastrian faith. We're talking about a drafting between the 10th and the 5th century BC, but obviously coming from much older religious traditions, right? And primarily praising the divine beings, portraying their various qualities, attributes, and powers, right? The yashts were literally recited during religious ceremonies, right? This one literally saying, we sacrifice to the awesome, regal glory made by Aura Mazda, right? So, the wise Lord, the Lord of wisdom in the Avestan language, right? The creator, God, right? Commonly depicted as a wise figure with a crown and a ring, holding a scepter or staff, meaningful enough. Defined as most conquering, highly working, possessing health, wisdom, and happiness, and it's more powerful to destroy than all other creatures. Right? So the concept here is, of course, about the solar deity, divine fire, as we will understand better now, that is literally awoken by what we see as earthly rulers, but are fundamentally the media of divine power, in fact, in the world, and that can crush any other force on earth, if properly won, as we've seen, deserved to the Ravena, right? And in fact, if we were to draw a parallelism between the latter, divine glory, and outside of the Persian realm, you would say that, at least for the fact that a bit, because they were later times, but a bit also because the Persians were a bit more feudal, a bit more traditional at times, this was misunderstood, at least, in the end, or at least in the way we have come to understand it as moderns, as something like fate. For example, the Hellenic Thuke. Now, the etymology of Thuke is fascinating because it comes from the Proto-Hellenic Thuke, the Proto-Indo-European Dwek, and it's equivalent to tunkano, that is, to happen, right? And it originally meant also, in fact, in the Hellenic language, the act of a god, right? Thuke is fate, right? Also, philosophy students would at least normally go by that, and not, if not specializing specifically, in fact, in that, in the European etymology, would think, but this is just fate, it rules over men, right? This is a very dual concept, because initially this was thought to be the prerogative of rulers, that is to say, managing to twist fate. Meaning what? Meaning that there is a gradual degeneration. There is this germ of fear that has struck the same divine in order to cause the fall, right? And as a consequence, the only way to revert to that primal status would be to be able to win over fate. I made, again, that beautiful video. It's one of the few that I really like of my own, even though I never listened to them. That is the one about the Fortuna Kaiseris. Which means that the Romans literally believed this still by the 1st century BC and AD, because it was literally the entire Augustan explanation of what had happened to the res publica, and also concerning the imperium and the divinity of Caesar, right, and later the one of Augustus, right. So that Caesar literally came out of metaphysically of the earthly realm, namely the one of the Res Publica Populi Romani, that as a chosen people was literally ruling over the entire world, and fixed the sacrilege that had been committed, right? So to doom further humanity, concerned with the spelling of the secrets of the Sibylline books, and that now had to be fixed, because in the world of the chosen people, you could not have such a wrong outcome, right? These were literally the best people that had proven to have the Imperium, that is the Cravena, basically, the Holy Ghost from God because of their military accomplishments. And this guy had, however, to fix it, right? Coming out of the system that had been spoiled, corrupted, and eventually leading, self-sacrificing, leading the path to Augustus in the process, right? So this is how Caesar had become literally a god, a comet specifically. And you find for example, also in the Anglo-Saxon epos, because there is the sense that, again, even in the, if we talk about the first millennium AD, if you look, for example, also at the Norse sagas, and generally speaking, Christianity as well, you understand that the entire world had began to abandon the idea of a feasible salvation through works, which doesn't mean works alone, because works cannot be accomplished in the first place without divine grace, which, as we've seen, is instantaneous. But it requires human action as well. Yes, it's still. Let's not digress in this, because otherwise I will restart another, confessional war. But we will get to that at some other point. Meaning what, however, is that, I don't know, still the late Vikings thought that fate was basically dooming people, right? And still this gloomy sense of the fall and the twilight of the gods, etc., was not looking at a bright victory anymore of the forces of the light that had already tamed the forces of the earth, just like in the Norse and in the Hellenic mythology, etc. Yet you find in some Anglo-Saxon poems of the time the idea that sometimes the hero manages, don't remember if it says to escape, so it's still something relatively corrupted, but still to essentially elude his fate, right? That is to say, they still believed it was possible to come out of that boundary. Now, I will not digress here on, again, Catholicism, Protestantism, specifically in Christianity, but to make the long story short, if you look at the concept of Thuke in at least the late Hellenic world, I made a video about this sort of rise and fall of the Hellenic civilization, this understanding, so very secularized and modernized, and intellectualistic, rationalistic, contemplative sort of fashion, Tuke had passed to come to mean the act of a god, from the act of a god to the act of a human being. Right, so it came to be understood as an agent or cause beyond human control, such as providence, fortune, fate, chance, almost. In the Fortuna Kaiseris, Fortuna is mother and daughter of gods, even. And it has to do with the second person of the Clausewitzian Trinity, that is the military one, the one of chance, gamble, right? That must be taken, right? Just like Alia Jacta S with Caesar, literally rolling the dice, and that's why it's referred to the Fortuna Kaiseris, which had been the only one that could possibly save the world and humanity entirely. At other times, this, say, fortune was regarded as a result, good fortune, success, conversely, ill fortune, misfortune. So something that in any case perceived as externally, but that in tradition was meant to be dispensed by the political leaders. So those who were to get this by themselves, by essentially achieving what God really wanted as the divine order of unity and world domination. Think about that. Think about what Tuke could mean in a world like the Greek one when it had been conquered by somebody else and ruled by somebody else. It's obvious that the semantics of words change together with their common meaning, so that's why also etymologies is so crucial in this process. By the way, I forgot to mention in this regard that in the Avestan aura of Aura Mazda that we've seen before, it means literally in aura spirit, Lord, right, from the Indo-Iranian Asuras, right, so Ansu spirit, right, that is connected in aura to the Aether, right, so the Mazda being again wise spirit, like, and properly a set of mind, right, that is properly put, right. If you look at the Indo-European root word, is something that is actively thought by men, right, and therefore attained, right, not passively lead, right, but still, of course, and that the most difficult thing in this is realizing what we mean by God, right, because there are people out there that simply say, well, so there is no agent outside that does this, because it's as if God was not there, just as if we were fallen gods and that's it. It's wrong to think that in the first place, meaning that, yes, there is not that sort of, personified agent that simply caused it in a way that, let's say, we can measure at least in that specific way, right? But this still has to do with the fact that spirit can re-achieve that level of power, drawing it from this entire universe that is contained by God in itself. So it's something that goes beyond our comprehension, at least humanly, but it is something that still gets this force from the universe through the transcendental capacity of the spirit. So I say this because there are lots of people, like even anti-Semites, gravitating around all this, that think, the Old Testament brought in this sort of more apostatized idea of God that is just Lord and commands and acts from the above, and the others are passive and supine. It's not really it. First of all, Israel literally means he who fights with God. Yes, there is a sense there that God obviously wins, but how couldn't he? Right? Nobody thought, even in the Indo-European tradition, that it was literally just about a single leader. It was about this entire thing outside of you that you had to motivate yourself for in order to attain in the first place. So the sense of the sense at least of alienity to it is the same reason why we think of God in the first place. Also because it's purely spiritual, right? I mean, it's at least something you can attain only in a spiritual sense, through a spiritual mean. Because, again, we're not gnostics. You need to transfigure the entire nature. That's the entire point of the doctrine of the true natures, also in Christ. It's something, again, we will see, because I understand that much of this whole explanation about the reality requires that specific belief, right? In any case, the Romans had something similar to this, sort of gradual institutionalized version of the original principle, at least. Something that the earlier emperors hadn't quite, again, seen, as we've seen the Fortuna Kaiseris was quite telling about the Roman awareness of the original meaning. Still, this relatively late time, but the monarchic institutionalization, again, the dynastic succession, brought for this idea of royal fate. We can say that the Caesars would ritually transmit to each other. And of course, it was a form of initiation. It was sort of traditional in its own regard. And it did pass through the original triumphal undertaking that was recognized by the people in the moment in which they recognized the ruler. Right, the sense, for example, remember the Rhoita before, the red, the gold? Well, the Roman imperator painted famously his face red, like Jupiter, because that was the original meaning of being a god during the triumph, because at that point you would have collected the imperium, that is the Holy Ghost, from your exploit on the battlefield, and you would revert that to Jupiter, that is God, and you became the imperator in that sense became for a while a god, right after having crossed the triumphal arc, which was, of course, expressing this underlying capacity of mortals to attain a divine status, even though there was the guy at some point saying, remember that you're just a mortal, like, remember you have to become dust again, like in Christianity, etc. Because, at least, the sense was that they already realized at that point that it was quite difficult to actually attain that ultimate purpose, and that this power had to be returned to the deity. And ideally, they still thought, again, that somebody like Caesar, as Caesar says, was literally like almost a god, he said. The same goes with for Augustus, that called himself son of a god. That was not just a reference to Caesar, actually, but to Jupiter himself, of course, because as we've seen here, there is no such thing like polytheism, right? You could attain what Caesar did only if you were, of course, God himself, so Jupiter in the first place. We'll come back to these things. In any case, there was also in the Hellenistic world the personified destiny of the city, the Thuke Poleos, that is the sense, again, that there is a broader destiny that we all have, and that we could be able to break or change. Free will and determinism compenetrate themselves, because in the moment in which the guy who manages to change fate still controls the others, right? So, and still in that sense was meant to be, because it's not just like an event like another, but essentially the one that God himself caused, and so was already contemplated in the order that is superior to any other thing, including this very thing of thinking that, yes, free will is only free will, right? Today, most people think that there is no such thing like free will either, because they think that it's just a materialistic superstition we live on, but that's their problem, frankly. Science goes very well in accordance with the idea that there is both free will and fate. And if somebody says, I don't understand it, or it's stupid, or it doesn't mean anything, it's crazy, well, that's exactly because you've been brought to that state of incredulity that has undermined our capacity even to attain these this divine achievements. The Roman royal attribute Felix is also interesting, because it normally was attributed to the state of prosperity, right? Felix is translated as happy, also in different ways, but it had to do with the blessing essentially received by God, and was referred to this context into the possession of an extra normal virtus, that is the sum of all virtues, and so the divine completion, right? And the meaning of this was, of course, that the divine ruler would bring a divine prosperity to the world, right? So there was obviously a deep motivation behind this all. Like, why doing it? There are people again out there says there was no reason, right? Gods did just what they wanted, and or kings also did just what they wanted, and people just celebrated them for no other reason. What kind of system would it be? To do what? Aside from the fact that from these traditions they did all exactly the same thing, but obviously, isn't it something that you may want as a ruler yourself? I don't know, to bless your loved ones, your people, the world. I mean, obviously there is a point of it all. If you don't see it, you are actually killing tradition, and the truest meaning of life, power, and victory that this entire world is founded on. Against whom are you fighting? For which reasons? Right? Obviously, these must be divine reasons with a sole purpose, not one that you woke up in the morning and just that might be just a trigger to achieve it, right? A way of yours to reach it from a different fallen condition, like we all very true. But this is nothing to do with the idea again that there is no point of it all, right? This is pure actual atheism. It has nothing to do with tradition. By the way, in the Vedic tradition, we find a similar notion, actually a parallel one, the Agni Vaish Vanara, right? That is conceived as a spiritual fire leading the rulers to conquer victoriously. The Vedic sacrificial path basically has this ladder, right? It goes from Agni, that is the fire, which is also speech, right? Sacred speech, the one in sacred texts, to this highest form, which is in fact the Vaishvanara, which is recorded, which is properly the universal being, right? The supreme self identified with the sun, or the supreme life, that is Vishnu himself, right? This is particularly important because what we just said before with Caesar, with Horus, etc. Agni Vaishvanara stands here for the spark of divinity that is within our soul, the sacred fire. And the Vaishvanara is God, so it's the connection that exists between our soul and God as absolute divine power. And it expresses the scale, right, of the journey that has to be undertaken when, trying to achieve this conquering victory that only the ruler of the world can do, right? This is the deepest meaning of the war. And that's where we come back to Egypt, because regarding to the secular power, at least the one manifesting secularly, but obviously having a divine one, we really close the circle. As I hinted at before, in ancient Egypt, Horus was not called only Horus, but he was attributed to him the function of the fighter, right, or he who is fighting, or Aha specifically, right, who is also the name, by the way, of what at least some Egyptologists consider to be the second pharaoh of the first dynasty of Egypt. The reason why there is a debate on it is that it's such a long time ago that we have no way to distinguish, like, whether it was a real figure, say an historical one, or a mythical one. In any case, of course, it had this connection with Horus, and so with this foundational principle of Egyptian regality in the kingdom, etc. And the interesting aspect of this is not just that he was fighting, and so being in that, as we've seen, dimension between the divine and the human one, but that also this fighting can be translated as the walking one. In other words, just by walking, right, he would crush his enemies. But in this sense, he was equated to the marching sun, right? Sun crossing the sky bowl and basically illuminating the world, right? This also has to do with the aforementioned sense that the Roman imperator would essentially advance in triumph, fighting and advancing in that way. It's also expanding human life and prosperity, as we've seen. And this is exactly how also Horus and Ra's light, as the sun figure, would give prosperity, life to the very Egypt in that case. All right. So it was, as an attribute, the fighting walking one, the designation of a victorious and glorious character that proceeds, right, that advances, symbolizing the solar principle present in the monarch. As just Horus Aha embodies the line of actual kings of Egypt, right? So, and as such, he was enthroned, right? And later, in the life of a pharaoh, the ruler was periodically reconfirmed in his role through some rituals that essentially reproduce the solar victory of Horus over Seth, right? Seth's etymology, he's the typhon in the situation, and the etymology may be connected effectively to he who is below. So, on the basis that Seth was Horus' opposite, of course, so embodying the telluric principle, the one of evil that had killed Horus' father, right? And so that was capable of actual killing kingship, right? And so that fourth estate, Dionysian, superstitious, communistic, materialistic dimension, that, however, is obviously crushed, right? Typhon Set is a demon from the netherworld, right? These rites were quite fascinating because at least one phase of them was called the walking in circles, right? And the idea was exactly reproducing the journey of the sun along the king's path. An animal dear to Seth was slaughtered, right? And this was carried out to emulate, again, the principle of the way of the left hand, blood. In theory, this was to be considered as, again, it's just like in the sacrifice to the gods, also the spoliopium, etc. The killing of this powerful competitor, an actual person, right? And that had to unleash power, because in the moment in which this killing would happen, it's as if that regal power had manifested itself on earth, right? Like the Imperium. I remember also in the Vedic tradition, everything that destroyed in the Avesta, actually, everything that destroys, right? More than anybody else. So this killing was necessary to essentially give new life, again, through the blood of the wicked, right? And so giving new power to the winner. And they literally believe when performing these rites in front of the pharaoh, this symbol of them would unleash an actual force in space, right? And this was technically happening because the animal was actually killed, and the, say, a discipline to attain these rites was just per se the manifestation of the celebration of kingship as such, right? It was a magical ritual evocation of Horus' victory over the world and the the earthly, the human one, if you want. So the one that he had one within himself, because again, this is always about slaying the dragon and learning the secrets of the dragon. There's always a dual meaning in it, right? Such rites evoke, again, force, life. They supernaturally showed what encompassed the pharaoh's person. And there is a very interesting Egyptian hieroglyphic that can be translated as power, dominion, the was, right? And this shows a scepter handled by gods and kings alike, right? There is a symbology also of Horus that has the head of a falcon, of a hawk. So it's actually the same symbol of the eagle in the European tradition. You shouldn't be surprised, at least, to know that even among pharaohs there was something like the literal Ulfadnars. I mean, that there were some jackals, wolves that the pharaohs were at some point embodying, like, I don't know, in the tale of eagles, this sense that the king had to pass through this becoming. And the interesting stuff being that the also in the Egyptian zoomorphic representations of these gods with, in fact, an animal's head, etc. There was the idea, a bit like the griffin, we've seen it in the symbology, for example, of the Bayeux tapestry and the early knightly representation, where it's a sort of in between, like the world of earth and the world of heaven. And so two animals that had to that represented this transition fundamentally from, again, a dragon to an eagle or something like that, and so transfiguring in the action of fighting, of walking, as we've seen. Interestingly enough, that sense that Alexander would leave to Rome, I had likely gotten from the Iranian tradition, that just walking into the east without even unsitting the sword and just having the people recognizing you and bowing to you, a bit like Christ that is recognized here and there in the Gospels as God, while some of his own disciples actually are dubious at some point about it, is exactly the same thing, that this power would manifest in such ways that just walking in would be enough to show this regal force. So a dazzling heavenly one when manifested, and from a spiritual point of view, in the measure in which was able to convince people of the worthiness of this rule, right? And this is very important politically, because it really tells you about the why, like, governments exist, how they work, and the fact that you always need the decisive moral support of the people, fundamentally, to achieve this. But it's you actually convincing them of this. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it quite by themselves. So there are some, again, spiritual qualities that automatically manifest when there is a righteous action, right, that are able to convince others of the fitness of this word specifically. Ultimately, and very interestingly, there are all certain signs connected to the pharaoh's regal divinity, right? That is, for example, the anshush, that is the concept of life force that derived from a word that was the one for fiery milk, that would essentially be the nectar, the soma, like, for example, in the Vedic tradition, it is the nourishment of the immortals. And this is the fire life force itself, is the spark of divinity within you, that you could simply drink from the spring of the universe when being able to enter in synchrony with this. And it refers also to certain physical experiences of power, of aggrandizements. Now, I will not digress, say, on other in other fields that, of course, of biology, that tell us something, right? Epigenetically, for example, that is a very interesting way of looking at the way we're able to change even the way, at least with our DNA, is to be transmitted eventually, with which characteristics, of course in ways that we barely understand, but that are likely connected to the awareness of this higher knowledge, at least if you get the traditional sense of it. And the word Amshish also connected to the Uraeus. The Uraeus was represented as a cobra in threat posture. The meaning would be the ascending, the great one, that is a rising hero, right? Which also, however, means the divine flame, right? At times life-giving, at other times dangerously destructive, as we've seen in the videos about the way of the left hand, right? The one with the fire of death blazes. Fire, remember that. If you don't know how to handle divine power, you can get destroyed in the process. This is also where all the legend of, for example, werewolves, of vampires stem from. These were all heroes that tried but failed and basically remained essentially punished by the foe. And so, well, we will see that in the folklore and traditional meaning of those figures. But they also had to do with the capacity still of elevating themselves beyond a merely human dimension. In fact, these cobras are represented all around the pharaohs, right? They have a solar disk on their head, right? And as a cobra, they're again, as reptiles, in fact, the lowest form of say, chthonic symbology, aside from, I presume, worms, etc. But the meaning of the serpents, of the snake, of course, is very loaded anthropologically, and these are intended as essentially guarding the pharaoh, because they embody the heroes of the world that answer to his command, right? That basically can be moved. Remember that ferocious force that can be unleashed against those who fail. This is a metaphor of earthly power and the capacity of the Egyptian king to avail himself of this world power could be awoken by simply his spiritual spread in the world. And you have the Uraeus crawling the head of the same pharaoh with the shape again of this cobras, literally meaning that, yes, if you want to be the pharaoh, you have to be even better than this monstrous creatures that would have been all the various lords and kings and princes that ruled the world, and that the Egyptians, of course, thought to be the overlords of, from their regal power. And this is essentially the deal. As you understand, I presume at least that many of you were thinking of something more about the Sol Invictus, etc. We'll look at that at some other point, but this is actually how wide tradition is for what it has only arrived to us, which is minimally in substance, but that allows us to draw the form, right, from itself, and that we are extremely, let's say, oblivious, of course, of all these variously intricate meanings that, at the end of the day, are also relatively simple, right? It's just fascinating in the measure in which you realize they all believed practically the same thing, all across these cultures, and it is traditionally a sin to actually believe that there is such a diversity still going on, because the universal values are the same, and the only people who don't want essentially to accept that there is a universal standard for everything, and so an absolute one, and one that calls you to the ultimate achievement, and so capacity, is why are we living still in this? Because we inflicted this on ourselves. We brought ourselves down to an irremediable point, which we practically decided to say, but this is too much. I don't like those who are in power, because I'm not, so let's tear everything down because I'm just a failure. And so if everybody's a failure, we'll feel less challenged. And what you caused is that, in relative terms, you got this sort of, haha, those were not enough, but you have lost everything in the process as well. So instead of helping and improving, you just destroyed. And what we're seeing right now. Look at what happens in Philadelphia, or what happened already in Chicago or Seattle. Like people just destroying things, stealing them, because say we'll have to eat, stealing iPhones, and mega TVs, etc., which hardly have anything to do with eating. But that's exactly the point, right? That these people are the most uncivilized, uneducated, dumb that you can imagine. They are actual criminals, right? And as such, they should be treated. And hopefully they will at some point. Tradition says that, karma does come back, right, in many ways. But the sense is also that there is that this happens only through an actual action on them, not awaiting for this to be fixed by yet the next person that never does it, right? So calling to action is the imperative, tradition, and that's why, again, I make these videos, because I really hope that through them I can spread, again, this sense of awareness of the world's issues through the lens of those who actually had enormously greater problems than us, in spite of what they want to make you believe, that, I don't know, in the Stone Age people worked so few and, with poses, and we are the crazy ones, etc. I would like to send you back in the Stone Age and to realize what it was like for real, right? And then maybe you could shut up. For those who do, of course. I know that here I have 11,000 brave, fighters that are not scared to walk, right? And we will naturally keep talking about all the stuff, hopefully soon. For today, however, I stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. As always, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.